Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday and we're starting one more live stream. Now is 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time and we are open for topics of your interest to be discussed live right here, right now. And while you warm up, Matthew, let's go. Thank you, Matthew. Good to see you over here. And while we arm up, just sharing an interesting question, we had in a consultation yesterday regarding the distinctions that Brazil is going to make depending on the nationality of the immigrant, right? And that's kind of somewhat common in the immigration framework for different countries, exactly like it happens in the United States with Portugal, for instance, and Brazil is not different. There is a discrimination, not in a negative sense, but there is discrimination in a sense that different types of visas or different types of requirements are going to apply. So, for instance, Brazil, as of today, has a waiver for U.S. citizens to enter Brazil, but this waiver is kind of scheduled to be interrupted or canceled, if you will, on April the 10th, meaning that after April the 10th, in theory, U.S. citizens would need a visa to travel to Brazil. And again, today you don't need a visa. You can basically just go online, you buy, a ticket, and you go to American Airlines, you show your U.S. passport, and you board, and you come to Brazil. And the idea is that after April the 10th, this is no longer be the case. At the same time, there are different conditions for China, for instance. For China, there is no waiver. For China, there is a need for a visa. Japan, for instance, there is no need for a visa. Many European countries are not gonna, need a visa. Nationals of many European countries don't need a visa to enter Brazil. So this is done on a case-by-case basis. And that's the same thing with the visa, right? Not only the requirement, but even the availability of the visa. So let me give you an example. The digital nomad visa in Brazil is not available for all the nationalities. I'm going to give an example. Haiti, right? Like the country Haiti, if you check their website, if you check the Brazilian embassy in Porto Príncipe, you're going to realize that they do not offer the digital nomad visa, and therefore you can simply you don't have access to the digital nomad visa in Porto Príncipe. And the strategy there is that someone would need to first secure the visitor visa, and then after getting the visitor visa, applying for the digital nomad visa in Brazil. So very interesting. And maybe a third nuance, just to finish up this topic, is that amounts that you're gonna pay to secure Brazilian visas, they also gonna change according to the nationality. And I'm not just talking about like how much you're gonna be paying if you are in the U.S. or how much you're gonna be paying in Portugal. I'm actually talking about the same country but for different nationalities. An example, like in the United States, when you are applying for a Brazilian visa, you're going to be paying different amounts depending on your nationality. So that's very interesting, right? Like, I mean, same place, same Brazilian consulate, but depending on your passport, you're going to be paying different amounts to secure a Brazilian visa. And what's even more interesting is not like just based on the, let's say, purchase power of the nationality, but is more actually related to how much Brazil wants to attract that specific nationality into the country. Okay, so you're gonna see some kind of weird situations. Some really developing countries paying substantially more than what like an European country would pay to get a visa in the United States, right? So very interesting. We have a Bill. Bill says, Oi, Luciano, bom dia. Good to see you, Bill. How's everything with you? Good to see you over here. let's take a look into the news. We usually take a look at the Brazilian news. So here you see governo encara tarifaço como blefe de Trump para negociação, right? So this is like the main news that you're gonna see in Brazil, particularly using the UOL. UOL is a major news portal in Brazil, and they're saying, like the Brazilian government thinks like Trump is bluffing, right? Like, I mean, when he proposes the 25%, tax, particularly on steel and other metals, right? And Brazil is a major producer of steel and other types of metals, and therefore, like the Brazilian government is kind of concerned. But just like it has been happening, like in some other instances, it looks like Trump, says he's going to do something. He tries to get something out of that assertion. And then eventually, like both countries are going to find some type of common ground. So that's the Brazilian government reading of the 25% tariff over steel, right? And this is like a major concern, like in Brazil. And like you see, like even the sub headers, they are still addressing Trump and Trump's policy. So very interesting, like when you see this happening in Brazil, and you're gonna find many people who kind of say that they don't like the United States, but at the same time, like we can tell that the Brazilians, they absolutely love the United States and U.S. culture, Hollywood, U.S. products. So it's a very interesting close relationship between the Brazilian culture and the U.S. culture. Let's also take a look in Portugal. In Portugal, there are also news about the United States and Trump, but interesting enough, like not like a major header for the news, but you still see a few things talking about the United States and Trump's policies for Europe. Okay, and this does represent well this connection between Portugal, Brazil, and the United States. Interesting enough, here you see a link for Brazilian news on one of the major news portals in Portugal, right? Like nowadays, Portugal is just like, a tiny population compared to Brazil. Brazil is like much bigger, not only in geographical terms, but also in terms of population. And therefore, very interesting, this kind of connection between Brazil and Portugal, because nowadays, even the small population in Portugal is comprised of Brazilians. Like a large percentage of the Portuguese population nowadays is actually Brazilians who have emigrated to Portugal, or are living in Portugal, or were born in Portugal, but they are still keeping the the Brazilian culture, right? Brazilian culture and Portugal and Portuguese culture, they are very similar. However, there is a major distinction, I think, in the language, in the accent. Like we can understand each other, but it's just like the British accent and the U.S. accent. You can clearly tell that it's not an accent, from the United States when you hear a British citizen speaking. And that's the same thing for us in Portugal. You can tell when the accent is like Portuguese or Brazilian, and that kinds of draw a distinction cultural wise. Very interesting reality that we have nowadays in Portugal. All right. All right. Bill says I got my coffee. I am all set. Me too. I have my coffee here. Very important thing, Bill. Like morning coffee and like afternoon coffee. They are a must in Brazil. Like in Brazil, we of course we have coffee in the morning. It's also very traditional for coffee after lunch or around lunchtime. It helps you it helps keep you active, right? Like despite eating. I myself, I kind of avoid coffee like in the late afternoon and in the evening. I mean, it just messes up with my sleep. But I know people, like I had a friend who would drink coffee before going to bed. So I guess it's like it depends on the person. Bill is asking, is there a guy stern in Rio, age stern in Rio? Yes, Bill, there is I would say a guy stern is available not only in Rio and São Paulo, but pretty much everywhere in Brazil or in every major city. And I'm just curious, like, I mean, how do you know about age stern, Bill? Like, is there age stern in the United States? I'm even like searching age stern. Yeah, I mean that's very very interesting. Like I would say every Brazilian knows about age stern, and for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, age stern is like the main jewelry chain in Brazil. Is like a very high, very high end jewelry store, and they kind of dominated the Brazilian market, right? But maybe they are elsewhere as well because Bill is asking about it. So let us know, Bill. Where do you know Age Stern from? All right, we have Julia. My Life by Julia. I can't wait to buy a house in Brazil and get a golden visa. I plan to move to Brazil for a better life. Very interesting, Julia. And let us know where are you based? Are you based in the U.S.? Yesterday, I had such an interesting consultation. It was with a person from North Carolina, and she said, like we do well here in North Carolina. We have our house. We have like a small, tract of land. We have like a couple of businesses, and but like the rhythm of life. Life is so fast here in the U.S. You feel like you're not really living your life, right? Like, I mean, you're just rushing from one activity to another, and it doesn't feel like living to me, right? That was those were her words, okay? And I think it's very interesting, right? Like, so in Brazil, of course, you have downsides. But I think that this component, right, of living life, of enjoying life, it's something, very positive in Brazil because people are going to take the time to enjoy life in general. And it does not matter if they have money or not, right? Like it does not matter. Of course, like, I mean, if you're talking about someone totally deprived, it's very difficult for them to, enjoy life. But I would say even people who are living on minimum wage, sometimes you see, sometimes they're going to be the happiest ones around despite all the challenges. So that's a very particular trait, Julia, in both Brazil and Portugal. I would say Brazil even more, right? Like Portugal has a very traditional kind of, old culture. And so they are not as, not sure if the word is happy, but they're not so lively as Brazilians, okay, if you will. But that's a very interesting comment. New Wave Brazil. Can foreigners with a CPF buy properties in Brazil at auctions? That's a good question. We never had any Wave client as a foreign citizen who would buy property in auctions. I would say, like, I mean, if I had it to guess, and that's what I'm doing right now, guessing, only guessing, is that once you have the resident card, they are going to let you participate in an auction, okay? But I am, 99% sure they are not going to allow you to participate in an auction just with a passport. It doesn't make much sense from the Brazilian regulation perspective, right? Like, I mean, if you participate in an auction, they want to make sure that they can reach you if you, let's say, if you are bidding for a property and you don't follow through, they want to make sure that they can reach you, right? And if you just show up with a passport, Basically, you could bid. Maybe you don't like the bid, the property you bought, and next day you buy, a ticket, and you leave Brazil, and you know what I mean. So, I would say 99.9% chance you're not gonna be able to do it without a resident card. Okay, anyway, I hope that helps. But yes, a CPF. Just for those of you who don't know, like the CPF is the Brazilian tax ID, and is the Brazilian tax ID. And without a Brazilian tax ID, you cannot do much in Brazil. Very different from the United States. In the United States, people are very protective of their, social security number. Nobody gives out this number, right? And in Brazil, it's the exact opposite. Like people are gonna use that for pretty much everything. Like if you go to a drugstore and you want to buy, IB for a headache, right? Believe it or not, they're going to ask you for your tax ID because they need to enter into the, payment receipt that we get when you buy something. They're going to ask you for the number. So exact opposite. In the US, very secret, very protected. In Brazil, it's even more common for people to give out the Brazilian tax ID than it is for our ID itself, right? So very interesting distinction. Julia says, I'm studying Portuguese. Good to know, Julia. And Julia is in Massachusetts, United States. Yes, we also, I remember we had a consultation with someone from Massachusetts recently. He was a gentleman from, actually, no, he was from California, and he is he's currently living, or he has been living in Massachusetts for, according to him, like 30 plus years, and he is about to get married to a Brazilian woman based in Bahia, northeast of Brazil, and not surprisingly, he's facing huge huge red tape and bureaucracy. I have shared before, sometimes people, they get to a point in which they basically give up to marry in Brazil. And nowadays there is the so-called Utah route, which is handling, like in Utah registries, they are handling marriage through a video conference. Nobody needs to be in Utah. Like you could be in New York. Your fiance could be in Brazil or Argentina or Portugal, and Utah does not have any problems with that. Utah is gonna get this marriage done legally, and guess what? You're gonna avoid all the aggravation of marrying in Brazil, given the huge red tape and bureaucracy. Bill, I was a jeweler for 16 years, and I was going to go to Brazil on a jam tour. Age Stern was one of the jewelers that did a lot of jewelry design with emeralds. Yeah, exactly. Brazil is huge, Bill, in emeralds, right? I know, like in the past, we used to support, some businesses with trades. And, like in Minas Gerais, Bill, is like the main state in Brazil for mining, for emeralds. But emerald is like one of the traditional, gems from Brazil. I'm not sure if it is just like Brazil, maybe Latin America, right? Like I'm taking a look over here as we speak. And I can tell that there is, emeralds in Colombia as well. And this one, for instance, is from Colombia, okay? But I know that Brazil is huge in emeralds. And, we Brazilians, we get emeralds. Like I remember when I was a child, my grandfather and sometimes my father, they would give me like a tiny emerald, like as a gift. And like it's not like a nudge of gold. Of course, it's worth, it's not as much expensive as gold, but there is like of course, like a monetary value. So there was a way for, parents and grandparents to give like a gift of value to a child and say, listen, when you grow older, this thing is going to become more valuable, and so you keep it. This kind of life lesson, if you will. Very interesting. I didn't know about this experience. And just like when traveling between the United States and Brazil, Bill, uh, more than once I would meet business people like moving jewelry around, like jewelry sellers. They would send someone from Brazil to deliver jewelry in the United States, right? So they would basically just bring stuff in their pockets, right? I'm not sure if there was official. I don't know if they were declaring the jury. I never asked such question, but I did meet such people more than once in my trips between the United States and Brazil. Right? Very interesting comment, Bill. All right, so let's tackle another question here from our backlog. All right. So is real estate still worth buying now that the US dollar is not as strong as it was a couple of months ago? That's the question, right? Like, and I think most people, when they do the research about the exchange rate, they are gonna realize the rate is still pretty favorable, right? Like, so if we take a look at the reference exchange right now, $1 is buying 5 reais and 76 cents of real. And again, like I like to share, those experiences we have here at the firm. Like about, I don't know, 6 months ago or 7 months ago, I don't recall exactly. Like, I mean, I would have clients rushing us to get a real estate transaction done because a dollar was buying, 5.2 reais, right? So if you look at 5.76, is still much better than 520. So even though it's not like the peak exchange rate, like a couple of months ago, it was like 6 reais and 20 cents for a dollar, right? So there was an all-time peak. I'm not sure if we're gonna go back to that, but as long as we still have this currency exchange rate, I would say it remains pretty favorable, to U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens, in my opinion, is not just about the currency strength. It's also about the abundance of money in the United States, right? Like, I mean, it goes well beyond currency, because, like, in Europe in general, like the euro is pretty strong, at least from an exchange rate perspective. It's even stronger than the U.S. dollar, right? But we can tell without any question, money is substantially more scarce in Europe than it is in the United States, right? In the United States, there is just like, so many people with, available resources. Sometimes they can, get a HELOC loan, right? Like those credit lines based on a property that they already own. Or they just have cash. They just have, cash saved, and 98% of the transactions we have in Brazil, they are on a cash basis, right? Like, so people come with cash. I would say an exception for Europe. Not sure if we can still call like the UK as part of Europe. I guess it is. It's just not part of the European Union, but it's still Europe. The UK is a big exception, right? Like in the UK, we also have deep pocket buyers. All right, another major exception to the U.S. Let's say leadership in acquisitions in Brazil. It's gonna be the United Arab Emirates. And it's interesting because we're talking about the United Arab Emirates, but our buyers over there, they are usually either like Australian, British, or U.S. citizens, right? Like, I mean, so it's a transaction with someone who's based in the United Arab Emirates, but they're still not. I mean, I guess most people nowadays in the Arab Emirates, they are foreign citizens. But it's also very impressive, how much purchase power people have over there. Our largest transaction ever is from a Australian citizen based in the United Arab Emirates. All right, so just sharing some curiosities. Jake FX, hello from Rio, finally made here as a digital nomad in January. Congratulations, Jake. And how do you like so far? I am curious, like, where are you based? Are you in Bandeirantes, meaning Recreio dos Bandeirantes? Are you in Barra? Are you in Copacabana? Are you in Leblon? Are you in Ipanema? Let us know. Let us know. Talking about Rio de Janeiro, Jake just got to Rio de Janeiro and he's enjoying his time as digital nomad over there. I like particularly Santa Teresa, right? Santa Teresa is not by the beach. It's actually by Rio de Janeiro downtown, and it's like an historic kind of neighborhood, and it's like on a hill, right? So it's very interesting, like to get there, like you go through those kind of narrow streets. There is a bondinho. Bondinho, I'm not sure the right translation in English if it is a tram. Let me show you over here some pictures. Then you're gonna know what I'm talking about. But that's a place I'm very happy when I am in Santa Teresa. Okay, this is Santa Teresa. This is the neighborhood I'm talking about. You're right. This is actually Lapa, but this is like what you see from Santa Teresa. Really astonishing place, but it's far from the beach. Okay, this is the bondinho, right? Who's gonna help me out? Like, what is the name of a bondinho in English, right? If you can help me out over here. But Santa Teresa, and here you can see the map, right? Santa Teresa is over here, so you see it's not by the beach. The beach, they are actually, down here. These are the main beaches, okay? And up here you have downtown. Up here you don't have actually beaches. It's more like the port. You also have the airport, like the Santos Dumont Airport, which is like the small airport. And our office, by the way, is around Santa Teresa. Our office is over here, also in downtown Rio de Janeiro. All right, let's see what else we have over here. Okay, let me tackle one more question here from our backlog. All right, so what visa is the easiest visa I can get nowadays to stay in Brazil for the long time? What are the advantages and disadvantages of such visa? I would say nowadays the easiest way for you to be in Brazil for the long term is certainly the digital nomad. It's not difficult for you to meet the requirements, and it's gonna allow you to stay for up to a year in Brazil. And as we speak, is being renewed on a continuous basis, right? Like, I mean, very common question is like, for how many times can I renew it? There is no regulation addressing that. I can tell you that at the beginning, during the prior federal administration, which was, President Bolsonaro administration, the idea was for you to renew for just once. Okay, so this was not something intended for you to use like forever. But there was no, subsequential legislation to address the renewal. So nowadays we are just working in a kind of limbo, meaning that the federal police says, listen, if you meet the requirements, we're going to renew this thing. So we have clients who got it for the first time, and then they renewed for a second term, and then they got a third term, right? So they are in their third year as a digital nomad in Brazil, and they are going to ask, can I renew for a third time? And we say, listen, as long as the government doesn't say that you can no longer renew, you can renew, right? I wish there was a better, more official answer, but that's how it's working nowadays. So I would say these are the main advantages of the digital nomad. It's easy for you to acquire. It allows you, at least as of today, to remain on a a long-term basis in Brazil. Now, the major downside, in my opinion, is that it doesn't lead to anything. Okay, so if you have a digital nomad visa in Portugal, for instance, after you've been in Portugal for 5 years, guess what? You can apply for both the permanent residency or even the citizenship, right? Like in just 5 years. And in Brazil, if you stay in theory for 5 years as a digital nomad, you can renew. Into anything, like meaning that you just needed to get a more longer term route. Okay. Also very common, like here at the firm, people they start with the digital nomad, and then eventually they say, listen, I tried out, there was the idea for getting this visa. I'm here in Brazil for my second year. And guess what? I want to be able to stay for longer, right? And therefore, I want to move ahead with investment in real estate, right? That's usually the route that you're going to follow. Some people, they end up finding like a Brazilian, a partner, and then they could potentially, like marry and apply for permanent residency through marriage. That's an available route, of course. Like if you find someone and if you wanna proceed with something like marriage, which is of course pretty serious, right? So it's not for everyone. It really depends on your plans. All right, let me see what else we have over here. All right, what do you think about the current state of things in Brazil? Is the Lula administration good or not? Do you support the Lula administration? Yeah, like, I mean, I don't usually like to, discuss, politics here at the channel. I like to joke. If I do that, probably I will end up losing, half of my audience because nowadays everything is very, polarized. And if you are, from the left or if you are from the right, then you are alienating the other half. And I will tell you, like, and I think everybody's going to agree with that statement. I don't think, the answer is to have a government that is left wing or right wing. The idea is to have, like people who are really interested in develop Brazil, and that they are doing their best, in any way they can, right? And I can tell you for sure, that's the same. That's the same thing that both presidents, right? Current president, President Lula, and prior president, President Bolsonaro, want for the country, right? Like, so from this perspective, people who are really interested in helping develop the country, I don't see a difference between Bolsonaro and Lula. Okay, now this said, of course, they have a very different policies for the country, right? Like Bolsonaro, he was more, technical. He was trying to bring really, uh, 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 the word is not good people, but they were trying to bring like the best ones in their fields to participate in the government. And Lula, he is more like politics oriented. So everybody in his like government is gonna be, uh, you know, everybody is gonna be like politics, right? Like, I mean, a politician. Uh, like when you look at President Trump, and then of course, like our audience is probably gonna be better positioned to assess that, but it looks like it's a kind of a blend, right? Like he's bringing people who are more loyal to him. So from that perspective, they're kind of politicians because it's not so much like the technical aspect of it. But it looks like many people they do have experience in those fields. So I don't know, maybe a mix between between Brazil and the United States. But there you go. Like so, I don't have anything against the current administration, President Lula. Brazilians in general, they're not really satisfied with the results. Like I mean, the Brazilian currency got depreciated a lot. Like economy is not doing so great. But listen, we have a very deep challenges in Brazil that are not related to the politicians. They are related to our society. Unfortunately, some traits of our society, and very interesting, like they could be the other side of the coin. We have a high tolerance, like to corruption, like to accept things that, in my opinion, should not be accepted. And this is not like a problem of the president, right? Like it's not the president who's causing this kind of bad behavior. I think it's more like a social trait. And so if we stop just blaming everything on the president, on the government, and we just try to improve ourselves, maybe we're gonna have a much better country later on. So that's my take. That's my take on whatever makes sense as a president for Brazil. Bill is asking about Bom Jardim. So Bom Jardim we have in different cities. Bom Jardim would be like a good a good garden, right? We have a Bom Jardim, which is a city in the state of Rio de Janeiro. We have a Bom Jardim as a neighborhood like in São Paulo. But I would guess, Bill, you're asking about the Bom Jardim in Rio de Janeiro, right? It's a pretty beautiful place, right? It's more like on the countryside, okay? And it's so interesting because most people know Rio de Janeiro for the beach, but the countryside of Rio de Janeiro is just as beautiful as Rio de Janeiro's beaches, right? So a lot of people, when they go to Brazil, instead of coming here, like to Rio de Janeiro itself, right? This is Rio de Janeiro. They are going to be going to the countryside. Petrópolis here is pretty famous, right? Bom Jardim that Bill was asking about is over here. But so all of this area is like the countryside of Rio de Janeiro, and is just astonishing. Like I mean, it's such a beautiful place. Let me show you Petrópolis. Petrópolis. All right, Petrópolis. So there are such nice places for you to go on a tour. Okay, and yeah, this is like Rio de Janeiro, but yes, Petrópolis, I think it's the main destination. Like we have clients buying real estate in Petrópolis every now and then. Okay, it's a really beautiful like city in the countryside. They have these constructions from the empire, from the Brazilian Empire before we were a republic, right? So you have such historic buildings in Petrópolis as well, and in Rio de Janeiro, for the matter as well, right? Very interesting question, Bill. Keep it then coming. All right, we have Yuri Travis. Good to see you back, Yuri. Yuri says, "Olá, bom dia. Is it possible to have a prenups if I stay together with my Brazilian girlfriend here, planning to apply for União Visa?" Right. So Yuri is probably mentioning the União Estável. União Estável nowadays. So there is no exact rule for that, Yuri, because União Estável, or like the civil partnership or the common law marriage, right? There are different names for this thing in different places, but União Estável, that's what we call it in Brazil. And União Estável means like you're living with someone, but you never formally married, right? And in Brazil, in the past, like if someone was living with someone else for 20 years and, one of those two partners would die, the other one would not have a recourse to, let's say, inherit anything from the other partner because there was no marriage, right? So historically, that was the purpose of União Estável. It was to give access to the remaining partner to have some type of, access to the assets of that party passing away. But that was the kind of rule, right? Like these people would be living together in the same house for 20 years, right? And then over time, for some reason, or what I like to call the Brazilian judiciary activism, or innovation, or search for non-stop innovation, they kept upgrading and bumping up the União Estável to a point in which there was a decision from the Brazilian Supreme Court that União Estável and marriage, they're pretty much the same thing, right? So this is very weird because like if a person marries, like they're choosing to marry, right? But then the government comes and say, listen, if you don't marry, I don't care. Like, I mean, as long as you have a relationship, you're still in a marriage type of situation, right? So, it doesn't make sense because now you have two things with different names and different procedures that are functioning the same, right? So you are basically kind of duplicating a marriage with a different name, and makes zero sense to me, but that's how it's working nowadays. Okay, Yuri. So what I'm saying here is that if you get in a União Estável, first thing, you're going to have pretty much the same obligations that you would have under a marriage, meaning, if you've been with a person for a few years, and that's because that's why I said, this thing has been evolving and being bumped up by the judiciary to a point in which is the same thing of marriage. So if you've been with someone for a couple of years, sometimes even if you're not living in the same house, a judge could find you liable for spousal support, right? So, very concerning. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you, Yuri, about the União Estável, okay? And the second thing is going to be about the prenuptial, right? Because you probably have the same reading that I'm sharing over here. All right, like I know that, União Estável in Brazil can, get me in trouble. So my question here is, what about the prenuptial, right? Can I protect myself with a prenuptial? And then the first part of the answer is going to be that it depends on the registry, right? So the registries, they still have some discretion in terms of how they are going to... maybe I should say something before that. In Brazil, a prenuptial is not done by an attorney, right? A prenuptial in Brazil must be done at the registry. So you're going to go to the so-called cartório. And if you have like a prenuptial, a private prenuptial done by a lawyer between the parties, it's going to have zero value in Brazil, right? For a marriage in Brazil, right? If you're married in the U.S. with a prenuptial, then Brazil is going to look at the U.S. because Brazil is going to say, all right, like I understand you're married in the U.S. In the U.S. you can have a private prenuptial, so I'm going to try to respect your prenuptial. I'm going to try, right? But if you're marrying in Brazil, then a private prenuptial agreement has zero value. So it must be done by a registry. And when you go to the registry, different registries, they're going to have different readings of, how much União Estável compares to a marriage. And therefore, some registries, they could say, yes, I'm going to get you a prenuptial agreement because you are entering into a União Estável. And others, they could just say no, like, I mean, this is not a marriage, right? This is a união estável, and therefore I'm not going to do a prenuptial agreement for you. And maybe a final word, Yuri, and sometimes I'm concerned I'm going to sound, harsh or negative, but even a prenuptial agreement in Brazil is not of as much value as it would be in the United States, right? In the United States, there is this driver of, following contracts, right? Like people have more freedom to pick what they want for their lives. Not in Brazil. In Brazil, you have, this vision that like the court knows better the judge knows better, or maybe you know what, like there is this gringo coming from abroad, they have a lot of money, and then now they are marrying with this poor lady, and they're doing whatever they want with the poor lady, and then once she's old, the gringo can basically just kick her in the butt and just get a younger woman. So that's a kind of the mindset we kind of see in Brazil. And even if you have like prenuptial agreement, the judge would say, you know what, like, I mean, I see this prenuptial, but I'm looking at the situation, I don't think it is fair. And despite whatever you're showing to me, I'm gonna tell you that you're gonna pay support, right? Of course, like I'm kind of exaggerating over here. It's not as let's say it's not as simple as this, but I think that the mindset that I just mentioned, it's kind of what it is, okay? But you're gonna see something a little bit more sophisticated in terms of legal thesis and this and that. Parts are gonna be finding stuff, but at the end of the day, that's the mindset behind the scenes, okay? In my opinion, right? So that's my opinion. Brazil is a huge country with so many different courts. Like, I mean, it's not easy to have a single let's say a single standard for everyone, or like a single view of every court. But that's kind of if we want to simplify the matter, that's what I would tell you, Yuri. Okay, maybe like avoid that route altogether. Like, if someone would ask my opinion, right? I mean, if you have a legitimate relationship, right? So maybe união estável is good for you. But if you don't have it, don't pursue that. Okay, don't pursue that. Like this is a question we have often here at the firm. People are gonna come. Well, I have a friend. And this can I get a união estável with her? Like I said, listen, don't do those things, right? Like, I mean, when you do this type of thing, like usually this is gonna come back and bite you in the neck, right? So I don't like to recommend those tracks. Another very common situation, even like U.S. citizens, which is astonishing to me. Sometimes they marry a Brazilian, they divorce that Brazilian, and then they marry a second Brazilian, and then they want to buy property in Brazil, but they never recorded the first divorce in Brazil. And so in Brazil there is this kind of again weird stuff. Like if you marry to a Brazilian abroad, once you divorce, your divorce, let's say in the United States, is not automatically recognized in Brazil. So you need to go through a process called homologation. And if you don't do that, if you don't do the homologation, you kind of continue to be married, at least from an asset perspective, right? So what happens is, like, a U.S. citizen, married for the second time, they don't care about Brazil because, they live in the U.S., but when they are going to buy, property, then they find out that they needed to have the homologation of the divorce of the first marriage. And, I would say like 80% of the U.S. citizens, they are, they say, all right, like I'm not going to buy property. I'm going to handle this first and then I'm going to buy. But 20%, guess what? They insist. They say, listen, you need to find me a way for me to buy before I get divorced. I said, listen, don't do it. Like, because if you do it, the registry is not gonna be able to tell you that you are married to the second wife, because in Brazil the paperwork is still reflecting the first one, so you're gonna be lying on your civil status, and that's a crime in Brazil. And then so 20% of people, they still wanna do it. We say no, okay, and then they like I would guess from this 20%, maybe 10% they go to someone else. I'm sure there is a bunch of attorneys in Brazil pretty happy to do whatever you want to do. But, it's astonishing to me. Like, I mean, people, like you left a trouble behind. Now you want to get in more trouble, and you want to bring us into the trouble. No, we don't like those cases. All right, Yuri, but just highlighting. Yeah, I mean, marriage, I agree, Yuri. I agree 100%. Marriage is better than união estável, because at least you can have like the prenuptial agreement very, very, very clearly from the get-go, right, Yuri? And even marriage, you have like this, in Brazil we have like the marriage asset regimes, And if you're marrying, you can pick like the marriage asset regime that's gonna say that there is total separation of assets. Okay, this is not gonna avoid that the assets during the duration of the marriage are gonna become common property. All right, believe it or not. Uh, but it does represent like your maximum degree of protection. Okay, and if you want to know more about that, Yuri, let me share here how you can know more about it. So you can come here, that's our website. You click over here and you're gonna type in marriage asset regimes, right? Marriage asset regimes, and then we're gonna have here the different types of marriage asset regimes in Brazil. And this is the so-called, total separation of property or separation of property, which, by the way, is mandatory if someone is over 70 years old, right? Like Brazilians, again, like they want to, or the Brazilian government or the Brazilian legislation, the judiciary, they want to tell you how to live. So they think if you are 70 years old, you can marry, like, let's say if you're going to marry someone, you should marry under a separation of assets, and therefore you're going to spook away people who could be marrying with you just because of interest in your inheritance, right? Like this is the concept. So separation of property, you can either pick by yourself, or if you are older than 70, guess what? The government is going to pick for you, right? That's pretty interesting when you think about, more liberal, or more, freedom-based governments, if you will, like the United States. But there you go. Like you can check on that theory, and I think you're gonna enjoy that. All right. So let me see. We're gonna have here. Let's talk a little bit about our next live stream. We're gonna have a live stream on Sunday. Okay. So if you wanna come back on Sunday, we're gonna be here as well, and then we're probably gonna have a couple of weeks break. I need a break. I'm gonna take a couple of weeks break from the live streams, but we have this Sunday as a last live stream before my short break, and I hope you guys are gonna show up. Let me see if we have any more questions. If we don't have any questions, we're gonna end up our live stream. Let me see. Let's give people a minute or so. Oh, I see here Bill. Bill is talking about São Conrado. São Conrado is another traditional. It's a traditional neighborhood. It's actually almost like a Rio de Janeiro. Okay, so this is São Conrado, Bill. That's a very interesting place. Yes, people they practice sports. As you can see here in the map, is still like a beachfront area, and everything in Rio de Janeiro is so beautiful, right? Like I really think that Rio de Janeiro, I would dare to say, is unbeatable, right? When you are interested in this kind of blend between a big city and nature, nothing compares to Rio de Janeiro. Okay, like as you probably know, I am in the northeast. I stay in the northeast of Brazil, right? Like I stay in Morro Branco. That's where I spend, much of my time, in Morro Branco. Okay, and it's an amazing place, and it's beautiful, right? Like it's not as developed as Rio de Janeiro, of course. But listen, I don't think, like anything beats Rio de Janeiro, right? Like, I think Rio de Janeiro is unbeatable. And that's not a surprise that, believe it or not, like Rio de Janeiro nowadays is like half of our real estate practice, right? Like, people, like people are starting to learn about Ceará, about other states in the Northeast. Many people, they love São Paulo, okay? But the vast majority of foreign citizens, they are all for Rio de Janeiro. All right, so very interesting question. Yeah, Pedro Bonita, hanging gliding, yes, like we call it Asa Delta. We call it Asa Delta, Bill, Asa Delta. So, São Conrado, Asa Delta. right? And this is the Asa Delta, right? So São Conrado, yes, is a pretty common, neighborhood. I would say we have Asa Deltas throughout Rio de Janeiro, but indeed, like São Conrado, because it's more removed, like from the city, right? Like I mean, I would say it's less dangerous, like it's less busy. It's easier for you, like to land, if you will. And that's why São Conrado is pretty big on Asa Deltas, right? And here you can see some of the pictures. But that's it for today, folks. I want to thank you for showing up. Don't forget to come back on Sunday for more. And I wish a rest. I wish a blessed